All right, guys, welcome back. One of the things I forgot to mention in the last video is that when you're picking out your steering wheel, you want to make sure whether or not you're going to decide to get a automatic or a manual car steering wheel. Remember, the automatic cars came with the Tap2Shift paddle shifters on the steering wheel, so that's something you want to take into consideration. For anyone with an automatic who already has the paddle shifts, they will want to make sure they get an automatic so that they can maintain those paddle shifters. The bezels, or sorry, not the bezels, the switches are usually included on the steering wheel if you buy one used. But most importantly, the plastic on the back is molded around those switches. So you want to make sure you get the right one. If you have a manual car, you can get a paddle shifter or a non-paddle shift. It doesn't really matter. The wiring diagrams don't change. For me personally, I always like to get the paddle shifter ones. My Mustang is a manual. I got the paddle shifters primarily because I wanted to have extra switches and buttons I could do funky, fancy things with. So it's always nice to have that extra option if you decide that there's a function you want to use the paddle shifter for. So with that being said, let's get right into how the Tap2Shift, or what I'm calling Tap2Shift, works. And before we can get into any sort of conversion work, we need to talk about how does it actually function in the 2012, how does it function in the 2016, and how can we make sure that the 2016 signal outputs one similar to the 2012 so that the car can interpret it. So what you are looking at here is simply a view of, here is my clock spring, here is my signal that comes in through the clock spring. Now remember, you have a right switch and you have a left switch. The right switch is your shift up, the left switch is your shift down, and we follow this wiring diagram. Now, the way I would interpret this wiring diagram is, at any given point, your car is always interpreting a certain resistance. How do I know that? Because if I come down here, now here's a splice or a junction. I'm going to go straight. Here is a connector. These are the symbol for connector. I'm going to come through. I get to my 634 ohm resistor, and I have a switch here. Okay, this is not an E. This is a tactile switch symbol. And what you'll notice is it's open. So this 634 ohms is doing nothing. I come this way, I go down, I go through the connector on the other side, and wow, interesting, look at this. It goes into the connector. It goes, now this is my switch, and we'll get into it in a second, but when I go straight down, I have a 4,120 ohm resistor. In addition to that, I have a 1370 ohm resistor. I come down, I go back out the connector, I go across all the way over here, I come back into this connector here, I come out of it, and then I go to ground. So the way I would interpret this is, at any given point, even when I don't press any switches, what's happening is I have a resting resistance of 4120, 1370, and that goes straight over here down to my ground. So at any given point, the car is interpreting that my resting state is 4120 and 1370. Okay, so what happens when I press a button? Well, the way I would read this and I would interpret it is, when I press this, I end up with two separate circuits. I end up with one side of the circuit has a 634 ohm resistor. And by the way, that's what's written here. So resting, and the resting is the result. But that now is in parallel to this circuit, which is the 4120 plus the 1370. So I have a 5490 in parallel to a 634. And when you do the math, you calculate it out, my resultant resistance should be 568. Last but not least, when I press my left switch, I should get bypass. I'm going to bypass this 4120 ohm resistor, and my circuit is going to go zip, zip, zip around that through the 1370 and then straight out to ground. So I should have a 1370 ohm resistance. Okay, that's how you interpret this diagram. Now, what I find interesting is that My measurements, you always want to make sure you do a measurement. I took an ohm meter or a multimeter, I set it to ohms, and these are the measurements I got. I got 6.1 as a resting resistance. I got 2.05 as a resting resistance, and I got, or a left press resistance. And when I press the right, I got a 0.64. Why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because if I take this 5490 and I add 634 ohms, that's how I actually get to 6.1. So for some odd reason, even though they've shown this diagram as a parallel style circuit design, it actually operates as if my resting resistance is all three resistors together. When I press the left button, it only bypasses the 4120 and it gives me 1370 plus my 634. And if I press my right button, I get a resistance of 0.64, which is pretty much bypassing the two large resistors and only passing through the bottom ones. So we're going to set that aside for now and just remember, we got to come back because my measured resistances are what I want the car to mimic, or I want the 2016 to mimic. So now we understand how that works in the 2012. Let's move on to the 2016. So here is my wiring diagram for the 2016. Now if we look at this, we'll see the wire goes directly into the left switch. It passes through my 634 ohm resistor. Now, assuming we don't press any buttons and we go directly to the left, we go down, we have a 1370 ohm resistor, we have a 4210 ohm resistor, and then we come down and we go out. Okay, why is this now interesting? It's interesting because this actually looks very similar to the other one, but it looks like what we would have anticipated happening. We have the entire resting circuit going through every single resistor and out into our ground. So our resting resistance is the calculated add of all three of these, which gives us 6.024, which is a measured resistance of 6.11. Huh, that makes sense. Now, if I were to press my switch here, what do I get? I get one straight shot all the way down to the ground, and that's it. It's perfect. That's exactly what we anticipate happening. And so we don't have any parallel circuits. We don't have anything because if your parallel is just simply grounded, right? There's no resistances here. Your 1 over R is essentially 1 over infinity, which is 0. So you get 634 straight down to 0, which gives us 634 ohms when we press left. When we press right, we actually get 1370. If we were to press the right one, we basically just bypass the 4121 and we get the 634 plus the 1370, which gives us the 2.05 and the 1.99. Now, what I find kind of interesting and why I want to talk about this is if I go back to my 2012 and I go to my Tap2Shift, my right button is the 634, right? And I demonstrated that with my multimeter. Here's my right button. If I go to my wiring diagram for my 2016, though, it's my left button that is 634. That's interesting because that reverses it and flips it on its head and wouldn't really make sense to me. So let's take a look at our actual... What I did was I deconstructed, I took apart the paddle shifters and I took the circuit boards out. And I actually traced very specifically what is the signal coming in, where is it going, how is it actually going through. And what I found is that, notice, my right switch is the switch that has the 634 ohm resistor on it. Okay? So if I were to press my button here, what actually happens is it comes through, it goes through that 634 ohm resistor, and then it actually... All right, so now I'm a little bit confused on whether or not it's actually accurate to the 2012. So we're going to do a live example. I thought I would have all this squared away, but I don't. So let's figure out how to solve this. So the first thing I need to do is I need to set my multimeter up. I need to connect it to the actual harness in the steering wheel, and I just so happen to have a steering wheel on my desk. So let's take a look at this. I am going to switch this over so you guys can see. Bear with me. My webcam is not that great, so as always, I feel like I do this every single video. I'm going to try to, I don't know. Oh, you know what it is? It's probably that my light is off, maybe. Yeah, that's a lot better. Okay. So, let's work on adjusting our, let's work on checking our thing. So first thing I'm going to do, hold on, let me flip back here. I'm going to go back to the screen and let's take a look at our harness to understand, okay, in the 2016, where do we get cruise control? So we get cruise control from number 3. And we get ground from the ground pin. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to take my so I'm going to take this, I'm going to plug it into number 3. Okay, and then I'm going to connect that to my power on my multimeter. Then I'm going to take this, the other end of my multimeter, and another alligator clip here. So alligator clips all over the place. And I'm going to connect this to the ground, which I already have connected to another project, but that's okay. I can just kind of slide it in here. All right, so now I'm going to change it to resistance mode. My multimeter, and what I can actually do is, I don't need to do that. I can just alligator clip onto the end of that. Okay, so do I get anything? No. Am I in the correct? I should be. I went to cruise control, which is the wrong one. I should be in number 8, which is my Tap2Shift. So that makes sense. So now I'm sitting at 6.73. Now that is a little bit high. I believe that that's actually due to my alligator clips giving a little higher resistance. I've noticed that when I use alligator clips and I don't pin directly in, I end up getting this little bit of extra resistance here. So let's just pretend for a second that that's what we're expecting. What I want to do is I'm going to go back to my, documentation here and just double check that when I do my left press, now when I do a left press, the wiring diagram is saying I should only see 634. But when I do left press, I'm saying I measured 1.99. So let's actually do this. Let's change this because I want to make sure I have this right. So right, left. So that's what we should get. Now if I press the left switch, what do I get on my multimeter? It drops to about 2.5. Remember, I have a little extra resistance, but that's a lot closer to this number here. Okay? When I press my right, well, that's not expected. 10.1. How am I getting 10.1? What am I missing? If I take this off. Oh, okay. You know what? I actually have a whole nother project going on here with the LIN bus, and that was causing a little bit of noise in there. So 6.1 as my resting voltage, which is actually exactly what we expected. So if I come back here and I go to bring you guys back up a little bit bigger, maybe this is better. We have 6.1 here, and we have a measurement of 6.1 over here. If I press my left button, now I should, according to the wiring diagram, I should see 630 or 0.63. I'm seeing 2. Okay, I'm seeing this number when I press the left button, which the left button, again, should just pass me right on through. If I press the right button, look at that, 0.64, which is what we would have expected for pressing the left button. So the way I would, and the way I'm going to keep track of this and the way I'm going to measure this is the labels in the wiring diagram above seem to be incorrect. The left switch as is labeled above is actually the right switch, and the right is actually the left. Always double check your wiring diagrams versus what actually happens in reality. I only know this because the Ford diagrams were equally, if not more, jacked up. All right, so what does this mean for us? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say left. I'm going to put an asterisk and a left, and I'm going to put a right asterisk, so that we know going in, moving forward, that this is actually the functional right switch and this is the functional left switch. So if I take this information and I marry this up against I marry this up here, let's say against my 2012, look at that. What's interesting is that my resting voltage, my resting resistance rather, is exactly the same as my resting resistance in the 2012. The press of the functional left button is exactly the same. And the functional press of the right button is exactly the same. This is great. This is great news. That means, guys, we don't need to change anything about the switches, the resistance, nothing when it comes to maintaining your tap to switch. We're just gonna have to make sure that we maintain it in the wire in the wiring harness, but that's it. Now, for those of you who just want to double check, because now we're concerned about this and whether or not it's accurate, let's just go back to our 2012, because I just so happen to have a 2012 steering wheel here, and we're just going to check it. Why not? We're here. So let's check our wiring diagram for our wheel side. So looking at this, our tap up, tap down signal, it comes through pin 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to check pin 3. So let's take this out of there, and we're going to go over here. So here is this one, and we're going to put it in pin 3. And then for our ground, we got an extra wire here. We're going to tap our ground into pin number 9. Let's drop it in pin number 9, and let's see how this goes. Okay, zero resting resistance. What that means, I probably have it in the wrong location. So let's make this pin number 9. Let's make this pin number 3. And now you can see I have a resting resistance of 6.1, which is what we expected. So let's go back to our tap to shift here. So we have a resting of 6.1. Then we're going to press the left button, and we should see 2.0. Amazing. 2.0. And when we press right, we should see 0.64. Roughly speaking, remember my alligator clips, but honestly it's close enough, and you can see it's dropping. So that actually is a demonstration of why you should always check your wiring diagrams against your actual practical setup when you're going to be doing this reverse engineering work. So that's a good thing. That's where we are. I'm going to close this out here with our tap to shift. If you're going to be going with an auto, you have no changes you need to make other than, I've already shown you, the harnesses are different. So where we're going to have this start outputting is going to have to be perhaps rewired a bit. And, we'll have to determine how do we manage that. Do we repin the connector here? I personally am not a fan of repinning connectors. What I like to do is I like to do little mini harnesses that we can put in between that will rewire it for us so that everything is reversible if we need to. So, cool guys. I hope you learned something, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.